I swear I've seen a lot of stuff in my life, but that was awesome. But sorry about your car, man.
Welcome, I'm Ben Boyce. This is the Dr. Junkie Show, and today's another pretty big episode that's kinda hard for me to put just one label on, but let's say it's part one of Society of the Spectacle. But first, what if I told you that you're religious and that you don't even know it? And what if I managed to convince you not only that that was true, but upon convincing you, you actually decided, I don't really care. The benefits I get from practicing this religion you've convinced me I practice are so much more valuable than what I'd give up if I had to admit it's not true, that I'm going to stick with it anyway. Thanks, Dr. B. I suppose if that were the case, I'd have an episode to do about it. And that's what today's episode is about. Surprise, you're religious. Let's start with a little more of that semi-philosophical cultural theory stuff that I've been using to make sense of the world on the show lately. And let's talk about spectacles. Or rather, the spectacle, the one that out-spectacleizes all the others. A spectacle is just something you stare at, something you gawk at, something you consume without any real effort on your part. You just passively absorb it. Because we don't actively participate in the consumption of spectacles, they can impact us in ways that we don't expect or even notice. They can change our goals, our values, our beliefs. So if a spectacle is just something you gawk at, then the spectacle is just the sum total of a culture where everything has been sucked into a framework of gawking, of getting people to passively observe so you can manipulate their thinking without them noticing. I mean, think about how much of your life you probably devote to passively consuming the spectacle, to mindlessly absorbing some sort of product designed to keep you staring at it. You got a TV in the center of your living room. You frequently sit there with other people, but instead of talking or debating, you all just stare silently at the screen. You've got a computer for research, for looking at spectacles that other people have put together in the past to tell you the, quote, truth about the world. And of course, to watch YouTube videos and advertisements, to buy junk you don't need with one click. But not until after you watch a few YouTube reviews about that thing. And upon watching them, you start to believe the promises that your product makes to cure bad gas or make your wrinkles disappear. The promises of the spectacle. You probably got a horde of social media apps on your cell phone in your pocket at all times, so you don't have to actually talk to anyone in public. Yikes, that'd be weird, right? And when you do get together with friends, you probably do more of the same. You might go into a huge dark room with 200 strangers and stare at a huge screen. Or maybe you attend a festival or a concert. Spectacles designed to draw us in and keep us mindlessly staring, mindlessly consuming, mindlessly accepting. It's already starting to sound a little religious. But before we jump way too far in, a couple reminders. As our boy Marshall McLuhan taught us, the medium is the message. In other words, the way we receive our information, or our food, or our sex, or our art, the mediums through which these things arrive at our fingertips, those mediums actually influence what it means to be a human way more than any one delivery of information or sex or art. You might see a groundbreaking documentary or a life-changing religious movie that feels so powerful it permanently changes who you are. But that one film is never going to do as much to change what it means to be a human in our culture than the existence of films and TV shows. The content of individual films, the scripts, actors, acting, settings, chemistry, all that stuff, it can make us think really hard about something, but the existence of film, television, and later of smartphones, it literally impacts our daily lives, the way we understand and navigate the world. The styles we use to communicate with one another, our very understanding of truth. In McLuhan's view, and in mine, the technology that exists during any era shapes what it means to be a human. I'm focusing in on media, from asking the preacher on Sunday what happened in town that week, to reading the newspaper the morning after the thing happens. Guess you better learn to read. to catching the evening news in 2-minute segments on Gaza, onto the Twitterverse, the Xverse. That's how we get news nowadays. Technology literally shapes what it means to be a human. Media might be the easiest place to see it nowadays. We change how we behave based on the tech we're surrounded with. But it's also obvious in all technology, all mediums that advance and evolve, that change. So in the eras of rocks, sticks, and basic vine ropes, humans fought for our food and survival hand to hand, or with traps made out of ropes. In some way, the strongest and the bravest, or the least cautious, they had an advantage in that world, at least if they survived. But things changed. We invented new things, discovered new technologies. Spears, knives, and plowshares meant we could use less energy and more cunning, more cleverness to get jobs done faster and with more efficiency. We became farmers and hunters, and we moved a little bit further away from one another, further away from social connection as the center hub of life, further away from what we might call an authentic experience of life. We realized that we could use that time talking to our neighbors to instead plow and plant our fields to feed our family, or maybe even to make a profit, and we begin to look away from others and toward our own interests, to stare at tech and to worship the spectacle. Printing meant reading was suddenly not only valuable, but invaluable if you wanted to know what was going on in the world, because immediately everything changed from you getting your news from Jim up the street a few months after something happened to getting your news fast, the next day sometimes, from a written document offering one-way communication that's edited to fit the format and the political leanings of the writer and the publisher. In these short subjective accounts of what is going on in the world, because they were written that way, they were missing a lot of details compared to the real world, to the real authentic experience. Being part of an event always offers loads more information than hearing or reading about it later on. But humans changed because it was convenient to know about the world fast and without having to trust Jim. He lies sometimes, don't you know? We turned a bit more away from social connections and authentic life experiences of searching for the truth towards summarized baby bird snippets of news that changed what it meant to be a human. Cars changed us from mostly rural people who seldom left our local communities to capitalists who could be employed dozens of miles from home without giving it much thought. And cars paved the way for our current culture of commodity, the world where you buy things from a store, or if you're like 95% of US citizens, from Amazon. And these things you buy, you have no idea where they come from, where the parts they're made out of come from, where they were assembled, who delivered them, where their trucks came from, the fuel, the workers, the raw material. You have no idea where any of it came from. Instead, and here's some Karl Marx for you, it all feels magical. The product just appeared on a shelf, or better yet, on your doorstep. Think of the meat section at the supermarket, a commonly used example that's close to home for most of us, even if we don't eat meat. Think about how those beautiful white-bottom packages of separated, sealed, sanitary, meant to make us feel like we're just shopping for a t-shirt products are lined up, laid out, offered for sale. You don't see animals being butchered and sliced into pieces in the supermarket. You don't hear the noises they make when they die, smell the blood pooled on the floor. None of it. You just see package after package of sanitized, segmented, out-of-context products for sale in a place where their origin doesn't really matter. How many of us would eat beef if we had to raise the cow, kill it, gut it, butcher it, all ourselves? Nah, I'll just have the veggie burger, thank you. But alienation, Marx's term that just reminds us that we're separated from the products we produce and consume, like beef, it makes us feel safe and cozy buying things. It actually makes us feel okay about supporting things that we might never support if we were forced to actually confront it at every level. Low wages, unsanitary conditions, injuries, sick animals, failed executions. I'm sure that's nothing like the nice plastic package of exactly 1 pound of ground beef that I'm looking for. I mean, I just want to make some sloppy joes. No thanks on killing the cow. Our capitalist culture of commodity, of everything being produced, packaged, and sold far away from any clues to the origin of it, It makes it possible for me to eat sloppy joes without feeling like a real dick. It replaces actual production with magic. The spectacle replaces the real. One more example. Think about how porn has changed what it means to be a human by changing what it means to seek sexual gratification and what people even believe normal sexual gratification is. You don't have to go meet somebody anymore. You don't have to get to know them, ignore their annoying habit. You know the one. You don't have to put up with their bad jokes to maybe make out on a fourth date when you got bad breath. You can skip all that authentic crap and just stare at a screen or at a piece of paper, mindlessly consuming sexuality in pre-packaged, context-free technology containers. All you see is the final product, the commodity. The point is that what it means to be a human changes with the technology of an era because you don't need to know Jim the Carpenter to get a chair anymore, and you don't need to know Terry the Well Digger to get a well. And you don't need to know Jeff the Cattle Guy to get a good steak. You just go online and start typing, or you go to the supermarket and start shopping if you prefer, and you're rewarded with an ever-expanding list of capitalist, faceless commodities that can fix any problem, fill any desire, all claiming to be better than the rest, and all of which also work on the same principles of alienation. You don't ever know where any of that shit comes from. You don't know how providers learn their trade, where they got their equipment, how the products wound up in your town. Nope, just click and pay. Give me my Oreos. What are these things made out of again? And now we're in the era of computers and smartphones in the timeline of tech, the existence of which has made us all into even more narcissistic, even more lonely, alienated versions of those solitary, screen-staring, silent, addicted neurotics I was talking about. We moved from an era which Marx described as commodity-driven, driven by those promises that any problem can be solved with a magic product if you got the cash, to an era which Guy Debord, our theorist and philosopher today, described as spectacle-driven. Now we live through representations, not experience. Don't worry, if that still sounds a little foggy, it'll make perfect sense by the end of this ride. Now, of course, long ago, humans defined ourselves by who we are. You know, what we believed, what we spent our time doing, how we lived our lives. Marx's big thing was to detail the cultural changes that caused us to start describing ourselves not by what we are, but by what we own, what we possess. Nowadays, that's old news, especially if you've been listening to this podcast for a while. But today, in the age of the spectacle, we only need to make sure it looks like we own the things, or that we're doing the things. We don't even have to actually possess the commodity to benefit from it, to endorse it. The spectacle, the accumulation of social media, film, TV, books, comics, ceremonies, rituals, the fabric of a culture focused on the image instead of the real thing, the sum total of a world designed to make you and me mindlessly stare at it all day. It's now our job to support it, to grow it, to use it to our benefit and to our demise. You want to know something about a stranger you have to spend an hour with tomorrow? No problem. Check Instagram or Facebook. And even though you'll know full well that every damn thing you see on there was put there by that person who knew that someone would be using it to decide who they were, in other words, they didn't post the real them, the authentic them. No, they posted what they wanted you and the rest of the world to see them as. You know this, but you don't really care. Back to that religious mentality. If the guy says Black Lives Matter in 2020, and if he has a pride flag anywhere in his history, I'm sure he's a good guy. Does it matter if he's a homophobe who just pretends to be pro-equality, or a racist who just pretends to be pro-social justice? Not really. Not according to Debord anyway. The spectacle has completely replaced the authentic. We prefer the fake to the real. I have a friend who's an up-and-coming rapper, and he's actually doing pretty well in the market, going on tour next month, in fact. And he's doing well because he's following the rules, doing what those who were successful before him did, and spectacleizing all of it on Instagram and other social media apps as he goes. He's living his life online because that's what the society of the spectacle demands if you're to be successful. But he also just got out of prison. So when I see him posing next to new cars and sitting on expensive motorcycles, I sometimes wonder if he's just grabbing a quick video clip in a parking garage when no one's paying attention as he uses their property as a prop. I mean, he can't own a Ferrari, a Lambo, and a Bugatti, right? But then, does it really matter? Not so much. At least not to those viewing it online in the society of the spectacle. We live in a world where the image outweighs the truth in importance. It's much more impactful to show your support for the LGBTQ+ community on social media than it is to support them in your heart or to support them in silent donation. It feels much more powerful to drive a truck or a car that speaks to your personality than it does to get to the bottom of whatever it is that you feel like that brand of vehicle actually represents. Whatever Freudian urge you have buried deep inside your psyche that you'll probably never even be able to get to the bottom of, so it'll remain hidden, but advertisers have found a way to connect it to products like Ford or Dodge to make you feel as if that urge you didn't even realize you had, that it can be appeased if you just buy their truck, their shoes, their brand of this or that. Are you a Pepsi person or a Coke person? Are you a Bud Light drinker or a Miller Lite drinker? Do you rock Nikes or Reeboks? The answers say far more about us today in a world looking on through their screens than the content of anyone's heart. So we've arrived at last, the society of the spectacle, as Guy Debord called it, the accumulation of images and productions that is now so all-encompassing that it fills every space in our homes, our closets, our lives. Everywhere we look and listen, the spectacle persists, and we fucking love it. We can't do without it. We help expand it while pretending to not understand what we're even doing. Mom's birthday? I better post on Facebook so she knows I love her. And the reason I feel compelled to post such a message? Well, because I've seen what a good son does. On Facebook and Instagram, anyway. They wish their moms a personalized, "You were there for me. Thanks, Ma. Happy birthday." And they get like 500 likes. Maybe making mom's day because she can see that you posted and finally know that you do love her. Or maybe she can see the 500 likes and finally know that people love her. The spectacle outweighs the real. Now, before we get too far away from the roots of this research, from Karl Marx and his predecessors, think about what you probably do when you get up in the morning. Let's walk through my day in case you think I'm suggesting I somehow managed to rise above the society of the spectacle. I haven't, because no one can. It's inescapable. Well, mostly. We'll talk about something called atonement at the end of this episode, but for now let's just assume the spectacle is a pretty tight cage. I mean, hell, the society of the spectacle is mostly unnoticeable, which means most of us don't even realize we might want to escape it. Debord actually described it a lot like a religion, as I said at the beginning of this episode, and that probably doesn't sound as incredible as it might have back then. To keep it simple, let's just think about what the religious people in your life, not you of course, because no one seems to admit that they're religious, despite noticing that nearly everyone else is. Let's talk about what those religious people do or say that's different than what the supposedly non-religious do or say. Think about how they differ in their identities based on their religiosity, and you'll have a pretty basic definition of what religion is. Here's how I'd sum up those differences. Number one, religious people have probably had some sort of coming to God moment, for lack of a better term. They can tell you a story about how they couldn't get out of bed. Things were so awful. My dog left me. My wife hated my guts. Oh man, things were bad, bro. But then I found God, and holy cow, things are wonderful now. Number two, they base their claims on faith, not evidence. That means any attempt to talk them out of it, to convince them they might be wrong, it won't work on common rational grounds because faith isn't about evidence. It's about a feeling that you never really label or even fully unpack because acknowledging it would reveal the insecurity that's actually the root of it. Saying, "I believe in Jesus because I'd be terrified of dying if I didn't," that makes it obvious that that's not real belief, that you're just using it as a way to avoid the stress you'd feel if you were actually terrified of dying. And in doing that, it would defeat the purpose, because that belief, or the illusion that you have it, well, it wouldn't alleviate the stress anymore. We claim to have faith so we don't have to look at what might lie behind those issues if we didn't have faith, and instead we were forced to examine the evidence. I don't want to examine the evidence, bro. I just believe in Jesus. Anyway, in short, number 2 is the claims they make about their own faith that won't prove devastating if they eventually turn out to be false. Religious people will just act as if the claim was never made and move on to the next one, believing it as much as the last lie that they just realized was wrong. And 3, much like point 1, they'll have not just a coming to God moment of epiphany, but also a more regular practice of offering solutions to complicated questions by appealing to their religious power, to their God, instead of examining evidence or reason. They'll use this framework for making sense of the world to make sense of the world. Now think about those 3 things. Does that framework apply to the society of the spectacle? Now let's walk through that day I mentioned earlier. I typically get up anywhere between 4 and 5 a.m., a relic of heroin use that only goes away when I use heavy opioids regularly. Then I can sleep till around 9. Anyway, before I get out of bed, I look at a clock that I purchased at Walmart, a regular user of the spectacle of advertising. I do so because I live in a culture that tells me that time is important and that I should conform to a schedule designed to make sure I'm productive. In fact, per Marx, productivity in our culture is actually the main goal. The only real purpose of the spectacle, says Debord, is to make itself bigger, to proselytize. That's it. And we found our first association with religion. Its goal is only and always its own propagation, its own advancement, its own growth. I come downstairs and I pop some Folgers coffee into my K-cup machine. I use the single screen so I don't have to throw away a disposable plastic K-cup because I've seen the garbage patch in the Pacific Ocean on TV, and I feel compelled to change my behavior based on that spectacle. And of course, the only way I know how to change my behavior is from what I've also seen on TV or read about in articles, the spectacle. They tell me use less disposable junk in my daily life. And already I'm waist deep in cultural ideology by the time my coffee starts to percolate. Folgers taste like Folgers because I grew up with grandparents who drank it. Their house always smelled like coffee, and the packaging became associated in my mind with that space and that smell. I also grew up with ad campaigns singing, "The best part of waking up, Folgers in your cup." And I grew up in capitalism, which says that if you're poor, sure, buy the generic product and save a few bucks, like I did through my early 20s and 30s when I was poor. But for God's sake, once you make it to that coveted middle class, treat yourself right and buy Folgers, my guy. And let me tell you, my life is so much better now. So for all of those reasons, and probably a lot more that I can't access, that Freudian stuff, I'm a Folgers drinker. Now, do I know that the majority of differences that I feel like I experience, from taste to aroma to texture, with Folgers versus other coffee, or with K-cups versus other brewing machines? Do I know that those things aren't real? Absolutely. But that doesn't make it any less real to me. The brand Folgers is kind of magic in that it's more than the sum of its parts. That's what the spectacle fucking does to us. So I come downstairs with my K-cup Folgers and my Contigo brand coffee mug because if I use a different container, it also won't taste the same. I mean, like Coca-Cola when it's no longer cold, Folgers isn't Folgers anymore once it's no longer hot. Or, if you prefer, Ice Folgers isn't Ice Folgers anymore once the ice melts. It's just watered down Folgers. I've never seen a commercial with a room temperature soda or a 3-hour-old cup of coffee because the producers don't want us to desire their commodity anymore once the temperature is wrong. They want us to consume a new one. So I have to pay a bit extra to make sure my commodity, my hot coffee, remains a commodity and not garbage, cold coffee. My wife, because my culture told me long ago through movies and TV shows galore that what successful romantic love looks like is a marriage, so we got married a long time ago. She's watching TV when I come downstairs, and on this particular day, Good Morning America, the spectacle of news, they're talking about this WNBA star named Caitlin Clark, recent graduate about to turn pro, who was drafted last night, and that, history folks, according to the news anyway, she was the first woman to be dressed by Prada for the draft. A $17,000 outfit that I guess shows us how successful she is, or how successful people dress. That's what the spectacle is really about. They're attaching feelings to products and then using media to turn us all into passive, mindless, horny consumers who use products to replace what would otherwise be found only in social connections, only an authentic human experience. I noticed Prada didn't include any footage of their production plants, almost like they know that the magic only works if the real meat house is hidden from public sight. So nowadays, I don't need to prove I understand oppression by getting to know my coworkers when I can just put an equality sticker on my office door and call it good. I don't need to tell the world I have money if I can just buy a Rolex and drive a Beamer. We define ourselves and others by the commodities they consume, by the clothes and brands they attach to their bodies. The real has receded into the spectacle, and we now all passively and unwittingly tune in 24/7. Absorbing messages that shape our morals, beliefs, and desires without ever noticing how we're being impacted, trained, and radicalized. Is it more important to read your friend's Facebook post about being dumped and to feel actual empathy for them? Or is it more important to reply with a heart emoji in a comment, "You deserve better, boo, fuck him," even if you're rolling your eyes and you don't feel sorry at all? Is it more important to identify your value as a human being nowadays? Or is it more important to identify your value as a commodity? To identify yourself by how much money you have, the products you can afford, the social standards of the day that buy people ethical credibility? The answer nowadays is always the spectacle. Show the world something they can just tune out and look at. Stop making us think. The spectacle is the intoxication of approved complacency. So now we're all bummed out and feeling powerless, like the world we live in is controlling us in ways we hardly notice and making us all into shallow, miserable, mindless consumers of fetishized products that are destroying the planet. Yikes. This might be a terrible place to pause and pick up next episode, but I think that's a good idea. And in the meantime, keep an eye on your ideology and the images you consume. See if you start to notice what I said at the beginning of this episode. That the spectacle is so inviting that even when you realize it's all religious bullshit that never lives up to its promises, you actually don't care. You consume your Pop-Tarts and ginger snaps anyway, because what else can you do? The spectacle's the only show in town. Till next time, I'm Ben Boyce.